sometimes the answer is going out and buying a new
Right.
system.
I think
Absolutely right. But when you're kind of reviewing a sort of an estate,
Yeah.
for want of a better term, and you're dealing with a load of people that sort of perhaps weren't involved in putting the system in the first
Hmm.
place, and they don't like it because they don't like it. Do you ever have instances where training in the first
Hmm.
instance or engagement with the existing vendor is a
Hmm.
first
Yes.
precursor rather than going out
Mhm.
to
And we
replace?
also have the kind of back to baseline projects where you have layered on too much over time, or the way that you use a particular module has evolved. And so we encourage people to go back to baseline because you've improved your baseline product. Where the trouble comes is people talk about training and they don't do it, or they do it in these big spurts, and they just don't have the discipline to work out every day, and then the other problem is sometimes the vendors are not providing ongoing training. They focus on the training at launch to get you going, and vendors are not investing in providing that more advanced ongoing training for their customers. So it's a very difficult behavior change that we're working on. But again, I've seen more success when HR is involved, to really highlight that this year your professional development goals include learning more about the systems you use every day. And I've also seen more success where in your planning cycle, you put time to evaluate the systems you have, meet with your vendors, and learn about what the product can do. And I think, Alex, that's different than training. Like what Scott was saying is, let us help you solution. That's a different type of work than training people how to use it. And so I think that they both have to be, melded together.
I don't think any association it spends enough on training. I think they tend to think of it as, oh, we'll train each other, which is always, well, not always, but is can be a recipe for disaster, because you have someone who didn't learn it right to begin with, and they're training the next person. They're training other people. Some solution, be it the vendor or through HR, something that is standardizes that kind of training so that everybody understands the system well, is what's missing, rather than layering on a mistake after a mistake and workarounds, that lovely word, workarounds. Being able to identify why are you doing the workaround, and who trained you to do that, and why is it happening. Go back to the vendor and say, do we have to do this? Is this what you meant us to do? I think that's going to be really helpful as well.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely. I mean, it makes a lot of sense that as organisations, you're making these big investments in technology platforms, and as you say, you find out that the team that did the original implementation perhaps aren't around anymore, and one person trained the next person, and the next trained person trained the next person, and eventually you'll have something ridiculous. So we'll get somebody say to us, oh, your system doesn't do personalization, and you're like, no, the thing our system does better than anything is personalization, right? So but it will be that they've heard from somebody that it doesn't, and they've just taken it as read, because when they were inducted by the person who was leaving, or so on and so forth. So yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think that HR involvement is something that's quite unique to the US. I've not seen that in the UK market as kind of HR owning that kind of that visibility of training and opportunity to improve the skill sets within the business, and kind of yeah, actually leading on that and taking ownership. That's quite an interesting approach.
We have a game in the US, I don't know if you have it in UK, called Conversation, where one person whispers a word in one person's ear and they travel it down, and then at the end it comes out peanut butter instead of, coffee. And that's kind of what you're talking about, is that same sort of situation.
Or somebody learned it as a new user. Like, if I'm learning how to use Ready Membership for the first time, my understanding of the depth is going to be limited, and my time to learn it is limited because I'm trying to launch the product. And so I think it's so important to continually to revisit and give people the opportunity to learn the next level of complexity if it's appropriate, or scale it back. You know, if you built it because it looked really interesting and fun because that was the solution that was presented, but in real life, it missed the mark. We do not do a good job of going back and saying, it looked good on paper. It doesn't make sense anymore. Let's adjust it. We are terrible at that. And I think that's just, I think you get ego tied up into people saying, you didn't make a mistake necessarily. And sometimes you did. You made a mistake.
Yeah.
You assumed that people would behave a particular way and they didn't. Okay. So let go of it. We're just so terrible at that.
It's almost like what you were talking about before, that over time, I mean, the suppliers don't know the client, and the clients don't know the suppliers, and ultimately, you both going into things wanting things to work out well, and for the client to be delighted, and for the supplier ultimately to deliver something that works well as well. But I think one of the challenges is that from a trust standpoint, even if you have good referenceability, you need to build up capital with the customer to say, to be treated as that trusted partner. Just because, you did a great job for an organization just like us doesn't mean you're going to do a great job for us, because we're not the same people and we have different needs, and maybe we're less clear about our requirements, and so on and so forth. But I think it is interesting that I really like the US fail fest stuff, that concept that we saw at ASAE, we see at AMS Fest, that whole kind of confidence to be able to say, yeah, we once did this and it didn't go well, and this is what we learned from it. Because you can have a really successful project, which, there's a little metaphorical wart on the side of it that is this one requirement from this one team that was poorly defined. It was executed against the definition, but it's not really cutting it, and it's not perhaps core. Coming back to the point of, is it like a core AMS Fest thing, AMS thing? But being able to have that conversation that says, yeah, we're going to do this bit again, or we're going to take a different approach on this bit. I think, it takes a certain degree of confidence as a kind of collective partnership to be able to have those discussions without,
And I think the vendor has a maybe not a large role, but a role as a consultant in that sort of situation where you have to say to them, why are we doing this? And I think
yeah,
that
exactly.
sometimes gets lost, that vendors or suppliers, there's a British word,
Yeah.
vendors have to be able to say, okay, tell me why we're doing this, and to step back and say, well, this may not be the best way for us to do this, let's talk about it. I think sometimes that gets lost, and I think it's an important part.
And I think, Laura, when you do that kind of assessment about just, I think we forget about the people and this is their experience and they feel overwhelmed. So I think if you figure out the culture of your organization, how you're going to manage change, and agree on that with all the vendor partners, I think that takes some of the mystery out of it. And it also just is much more transparent. Here's what we're doing. Here's how we're going to do it. So if we're going to introduce a change, and you said, Scott, let us, your solution providers, offer a solution to the problem you're trying to solve, and you put it into this framework that is that this is a very, very different than what we're doing now. So that executes the change process. Look at it, study it, and then just figure out, how does the technology support what you're trying to do, and where do people have to communicate differently or change the website or educate the members on how they'll approach their professional development differently. And I think just doing those prep layers
Mhm.
lowers the risk of people shutting down or digging into a particular way of doing things because they don't feel the opportunity to do it differently without making it feel personal. So I just think we need to spend more time on the
Mhm.
human experience of the staff, and then how the end user, the member, will react. Because a lot of our scientists, Laura, they're scientists, lawyers,
Yep.
physicians, they're used to following a
Yep.
certain process.
Yep.
And if they're trying to get their professional development hours, or they're trying to submit an abstract for speaking, that's very important to them. And we need to make sure that they're brought into the loop because they're busy. They might only submit an abstract once a year.
Mhm. And
And we, the staff, do it all the time.
but sometimes you bring to light issues around capability with regard to the staff member who's being asked to pick up and operate. And obviously, if the mindset is right, then skill set can be dealt with training and
That's
that
right.
kind of thing. But if you are digitally transforming this organization, you may find yourself in a situation where certain people are not prepared to get on the bus. And how does that factor into a conversation, or do you have those kind of
We have to.
conversations when you're
Yeah.
you're
You have to
advising
be
leaders?
upfront about it.
And
You
that's
have
what
to
you were
say
saying
it.
earlier. And when you were saying, where's the CEO's role? This is the CEO's role. And using the word change management for people helps, again, put a framework in place to say our goal is to ensure that our members can present their data that they're studying to their colleagues effectively, that people can come together and go to an event, that they can have their professional development hours met, they can join. That's what we're doing. This is what the technology track will do. And these are all the processes that our organization that wraps around that, from marketing that to them, to giving them good customer service, a good web experience. So I think that's where the leader has to set the tone and say, this is the framework we're going to use, and help you, the vendor, identify these are going to be the really sticky ones. And that's where having a process will help give language and give people the opportunity. Like you were saying, Alex, people may need to be moved to a different role, or you may need to introduce a different role. That scares people. And you, the vendor, really can't do that effectively. That's where you have to have a good relationship with the CEO or the leadership team to say, this role is more than just a business process change. It's more than switching technology. You need a staffing change. That's something you can't do.
That's where a consultant's role is really invaluable, because you've been on the journey with them
Mm-hmm.
through the selection. You've built up that trust
Yep.
capital. Whereas, when a vendor turns around and says, look, we can only have this conversation 2 or 3 more times. This is the problem between chair and keyboard. This is not a technology issue.
Right.
So yeah, I think acknowledging that people input is so vital, actually. And so obviously the advice is always work with a consultant to
That's
support
right.
you for areas that there might be. Yeah, I
But
get
Alex,
it.
You got it.
Alex, we
You got
might
it,
say that
Alex.
to
That's
you.
it.
We might say, hey,
Mhm.
Alex, this is the third time we're going to have this discussion, that the person on your team doesn't get it. They are a technologist
Yeah,
who wants to move a process from A to B.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that a, a legal expert or a physician or an engineer approaches this is not the way that you want to develop it. You have to change. So it goes both ways. You're
of
right.
course.
So the
Yeah,
technologist
absolutely.
wants the most efficient, cool, using technology the
Mm-hmm.
best way possible, but that may not be what the end customer needs.
Have you come across yet in projects that you've been involved with, any instances where AI is really delivering significant value for the organization, enabling them to do something that they truly weren't able to do before?
Well, maybe not that they weren't able to do, but they weren't able to do efficiently, especially around marketing. Oh my gosh, yeah, marketing and just anything that you can get somebody else to draft for you, and you just put on the finishing touches rather than spending hours. I think that's probably the place that I've seen it used most efficiently. Um, by associations, and they're just getting into it, they're just figuring it out. And one of the things that we have to be careful of is how things are being addressed in AI, and there's a lot of movement in the industry around responsibility and how to use it effectively but responsibly. Don't put your social security numbers in there. You guys don't have social security numbers, I'm assuming, but don't put information in that you don't want everyone in the world to know, and be careful with your members'
Yeah.
information around that as well. So those are two things I think we have to think about.
Yeah.
Gretchen, you got an example of
Yeah, and I'm
something?
seeing a lot in, yeah, more in in e-commerce, when you're trying to match, again, when people have a professional development
Mm.
path and they have to earn hours, I'm seeing more AI help find unique opportunities for people across all of the properties that an association may offer. The other thing I'm seeing is a focus on bias, and so that associations make
Hmm.
sure that the data that the AI is using is good quality, because especially some of the
Mm.
historical in publishing, some of that data may not be accurate anymore, or it might have inherent bias in it. So I'm seeing associations take a harder look at how do we make sure the algorithms are
Right.
leveling up again to support what current information is, and not doubling down on the bias that is inherent. So that's the other piece that I'm seeing associations focus on.
Definitely. And the generative AI side of things is very interesting in terms of, take this large meeting and summarize the salient
Mhm.
points, or, take this large document and summarize it. I think bias is a really interesting one. And I think, coming back to that cleaning of data, of get rid of any old data that is of poorer quality.
Mm-hmm.
Rubbish in,
Oh,
rubbish
that's
out,
right.
just
Yeah.
smarter rubbish
If
out, I
opinions
guess.
have changed over the
That's,
years, make sure you
Mhm.
to the bias point.
Yeah, but we're just in the forefront of this, and we're still on the fear stage of it, and experimenting and finding opportunities. The other thing I'm seeing pretty quick uptake is help. Automated help in associations.
yeah.
Corporate is a little bit ahead, with the robo help, but again, using that rich data that customer service teams have to help members find things faster. Um, I've seen some great improvements
Mm-hmm. And
recently.
a lot of them. I mean, everybody's got a chat bot these days, and so there are going to be more and more of those.
Everyone has one, a chatbot, but is the quality good, or is that a negative experience for your customers if you get in those loops? So that's the change I've seen, is the technology getting smarter and not frustrating people when they're trying to solve a problem rather than actually solve it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we know that the AI can lie as well, and it
Mhm.
does certainly sort of make stuff up. But I think the only other area where we've seen AI work quite effectively, and again, it's probably a maturity thing, is in automated translations.
Mhm.
So, as a first pass on our product, most of our product has been translated into other languages using things like
Mhm.
DeepL, and actually certainly for organisations where they have an international audience, and they do want to offer sort of some degree of localization. We have seen sort of alternatives to Google Translate, popping up in the last few months that really have seemed to have pushed that on to the sort of the next level, actually, in terms of quality.
Mhm. That's good.
In quite a scary way.
Hmm.
Um, so really, from a summary standpoint, it seems that there's definitely things to be learnt on either side in terms of slightly different approaches. I think the approach of change management, I think, is definitely more embedded. We certainly, of the projects that we're experiencing, we're seeing a more maturity in terms of procurement from some of the US deals that we're seeing, and also a more sort of, as you say, change management type approach. But I suppose, just to sum up, if we have interested parties that are just thinking about engaging on a new project, and they're sort of trying to assess their sort of overall readiness to sort of embark on a change project. Just to start with yourself, Laura, what would your sort of top tips be for preparing for a project?
The hardest part is gauging whether you really are ready for this project or not, and that you have to involve at the very beginning the people that will be affected, the people that will be using any system, or any project, being involved in any project. You have to get them involved as well, because nobody wants something, well, for lack of a better word, shoved at them, like, here it is. And I think it's really important that you understand how big a project it's going to be. And that may be good or bad. It may turn out either way, but you have to be prepared for the long haul particularly when you're talking about something like an AMS or CRM or something. You have to be prepared. Your point about digital transformation versus digital project, got to be clear on that. They need to understand that it is a transformation. It will be going on probably forever. It's never, change never stops, and that is a really important topic. Preparing them for that kind of fatigue, for the project fatigue, for the transformation fatigue, that at some point you're going to get tired of all this and things are going to backslide. Try what to do to avoid that, I think, is important as well. So just, prepare as best you can and realize that there's going to be things that happen that you didn't think were going to happen. It's going to be surprises along the way, and those are okay too.
Good stuff. And Gretchen?
I think to your point earlier about knowing what's regulatory and fixed. So if these are things that the organization does and they can't change, and the association knows that they will be irritating to the vendor to say, this is how our credentialing works, it's a regulatory item. But separating, these are things that we do that are complex, that are not regulatory, that we may need to unpack. I think starting to mark those out early will help just everybody configure more effectively. And for the things that are not regulatory, to your point earlier, Alex, about prototyping failing fast, if you really are challenging yourself to make a process more efficient for your member or for your staff member, how are you going to test it out in a new environment so that you avoid some of that fatigue that Laura's describing? And then the second thing I would say is think about year 2. So year 1 is that huge learning curve to move to a new system, and then plan for a year 2 to allow people to sink into it, revisit things, give people the opportunity to fine tune, and put that in your project plan so that if you're asking me to do something small in the beginning, I see on the plan that I'm going to have the opportunity to mature it or edit it later. So I just think that's important to focus on year 1, which everybody does, but just as much time on year 2 to let people relax, recover, and then really, just do a second round of fine tuning. I think is super helpful.
I mean, I would have a tip, which I would say is, I think that there's always a fear, I think, for organizations of sharing budgets. If we share our budget, we're just going to get a load of quotes where, it's $1 less than what the budget is, or it's $1 more than what the budget is, and the budget is going to drive things. But I think for us as vendors, knowing because there is such a different scale of sort of solutions out there, knowing that the budget is realistic and knowing how the budget has been formed is really helpful in order to sort of qualify out early, or know that this is actually sensible, and so on and so forth. But so that was my one, snuck in there quickly. But have you got any yourself, Scott, as well?
I guess it's kind of slightly related. It's just making sure, as best you can, that you are comparing apples and apples. There are so many instances, because there are so many different variations of platforms out there. You can kind of look at them at the top level, and they all look very, very similar, and there's nothing to distinguish them. But it's really when you kind of get into the depth of the product and the breadth of it, that you truly understand how flexible and how a product is going to work for you. That's difficult to get out during an RFP process. So, I mean, one of the projects we won recently actually was just purely demos. There was no RFP. There was a single page document that kind of broadly said, we're looking for a new AMS. And then we just went through a series of demos with different team members. I think it's probably 5 or 6 in total. And everybody had their own kind of voice to kind of delve into the depth of the product and ask more questions. And then they made a selection off the back of that. And actually, for me, that was great, because I didn't have to respond to large RFP documents. Sorry, but actually, we were able to truly get across the power of the platform and distinguish it from our competitors. So that's a slightly biased look at it from my perspective. I guess the other one, just actually, both of your bits of feedback there were really really useful. But I just want to pick up on the bit that Gretchen said there about that planning for year 2 onwards, and planning that that future change and that ability to iterate the processes and implementation. It's not just we're going to implement this in year one and that's it. Yes, let's get us onto the new platform. Let's improve some of the key processes. These other processes, yes, we could look to improve those in the future. We're not going to ignore them, but for phase one and year one, we just, there's that transformation piece, and then it's a case of right now, what can we do next to improve these other areas? Because that does give people that kind of glimmer of hope and light that they're going to be heard and they're going to be able to get their processes improved as well. So I really like that one. That's really good.
Good stuff. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for taking the time out today at the various times I know that we're all sitting. I think really useful insights, and hopefully it's been useful for everyone that watches this. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, both.